sorry, would it be okay if we had this debate that's about to happen here?
Just do whatever you want. Sorry?
Yeah. Would it be okay if you work somewhere else? That'd be fine.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you so much.
Religion, in many circumstances, spreads joy and love to the world. It's helped countless people through hard times, the most difficult points in their life. It shows the true beauty of mankind. On a personal level as well, I find it hard to argue against speaking against any promotion of an institution that gives out free wine every Sunday. In my speech today, I'm going to be looking at freedom of religion and what that really counts for. I'm also going to be making lots of jokes because that worked last time, and I'm also going to be doing a lot of rebuttal because I wasted my prep time thinking of the aforementioned jokes. So firstly, starting on this idea of like the right to protection, we get told that you aren't given consent in a public space, and like, to be clear, you don't give consent to like anything that happens in the public space. It's unclear why this in particular is like one thing that you don't consent to. I also don't consent to like anyone being around me in this like public space. And to the extent you do consent, we think you consent to just like the fact these things might happen. You might be exposed to these things. We think this is like a necessity in society. We put up with it. We also get told that specifically the issue like it was these methods of promotion. And as is kind of like quite correctly pointed out, this is like true of anyone, right? Anybody can use these kind of methods to promote any ideology. We then get told like we're told that religion is inherently worse. Well, I just find it hard to believe that like neo-Nazis promoting their beliefs is like worse than grannies doing a bake sale for the local church, right? Like, just to be clear, Gov, when they said their cakes were to die for, they didn't mean literally. Secondly, we get on this idea of religious charities and like why they're necessarily quite bad. And like, no, like we don't think it's great, but it's important that we analyze alternatives in debating, right? The alternative being they don't receive this charity, they don't receive this aid. We think to many of these people that's like a necessary standoff. The Catholic Church is literally the biggest provider, non-government provider of aid in the world. We think that that's quite a good thing to happen. And then finally, like, Aaron's going to talk more about that. And finally we get told in general that like they're protecting minority groups. They're protecting those who wouldn't have like this, or they'd be swept up in the majority anyway. I'm going to be explaining why that's not true in my speech. So firstly, the freedom of religion. We think what's important to analyse is that a big part of freedom of religion is the freedom to practice, being able to establish your own beliefs. But secondly, we think it's like the freedom to believe, the freedom to find out about things, the freedom to know and make a choice about what you believe in. And we think for that to happen, you necessarily need to know the options. You need to know what is available to you. We think that's unlikely to happen under status quo. I'll explain more about that later. But first, like, what do we mean when we're talking about an informed decision? Because we think there's many different philosophies in the world that are massively different. That's often reflected in religion. We think they are vastly different to the extent where you might not even know that you are like a religious person until you have found out about a certain religion. We think, therefore, you're unlikely to go and seek out these options if you believe that is the case. We think that necessarily, preaching helps overcome this. But secondly, like, religion is inherently going to be about belief, right? You can't have this idea that you present these incredibly rational, thought-out presentations to someone, or at least not in the traditional sense. Preaching is one of the few ways we get this across. Like, we think it is an emotional, human appeal to another person in society. We think in that sense, like, that is one of the best bits of religion. We think that only comes across when you get this genuine human interaction. People actually spreading the joy that their religion has brought to them. We think if we're going to push down this aspect of religion that actually has been quite great over the years, that's quite a bad thing. Now, they tell us you can get it elsewhere. The example they specifically give is like school, right? We don't think we tend to teach religion in a manner, quite rightly, that tends to promote that religion. We think we teach it in a manner that is more about the customs and beliefs of those things, rather than like actually the reasons people might want to believe them. And we think often, like, therefore, it comes from a secular standpoint. We think, therefore, we're unlikely in a like counter model to get it there. Secondly, the home. Like, families are very unlikely to ever allow, like, certain conservative beliefs are unlikely to allow you to ever like convert to religion. That's true, but we think just unlikely they're going to give you this like idea that you do have many choices. Are unlikely to talk about that. We then get told in like response to this by OG that like, well, it's even worse when society's doing it because there's more of them, right? But we've got to analyze that people have a certain level of like connection to more people more. Just going like, there are more people doing it in this circumstance, therefore it's even worse, is just not conceding the fact that people are much closer to their families, much more likely to directly believe them. Continuing on, the freedom to preach, because we think what's important to analyze is this is a core tenet of many religions, is that they do spread themselves. They do try and convince people that they have the true belief. We think that is a necessary part. And like, why shouldn't it be, right? Because I get quite annoyed when I have religious friends that don't try to convert me, because they literally think I'm going to hell, but they're not doing anything about it. I think that says a lot about the kind of guy I am, right? And that makes me really sad. So we think we just have to concede that this is directly going against the beliefs of many religions. Many religions will be directly offended for this. They will see this as a core attack on their beliefs. We think that they have to address that as a harm. Now, specifically, we think this harms smaller religions, right? Because Catholics in many majority Catholic countries are probably going to be fine by this. They've already got their foothold in the door. People know what they're all about. We think the people it's attacking are people like the wonderful Mormons, and that's really sad because they're super nice. And we think that this just furthers the oppression that we already see against these groups, because we think there are incentives for these majority religions to keep these down, to not present them in the public sphere, to not have them go out and be there. And this is the one of the few ways that they actually get their voices out. That's why you will mainly see like more niche religions like proselytizing in public spaces. We think that this then leads to an entrenching of like religions in society. It's very difficult for those in the minority to break this grass because they are pushed down and stopped from preaching. I'll take closing.
How often have you stopped and talked to a street preacher?
I mean, like 7 or 8 times. That's just me. I'm quite lonely. Like, in general, we're willing to accept that is true. We think the kind of people that are going to stop and preach are probably the kind of people that would quite like religion. They probably do feel like they're not enfranchised in life. Just like, I'm willing to accept that we're all clever debaters that think we know everything, but some people don't, and some people do feel lost. We think that's a great way for them to find it. So then, continuing this idea, like, we think the end result of this is that it is a removal of personal freedom. You lack this free choice that you are given on the other side, or at least you have a less of a free choice, that is to say, because you do only receive this one religion that is probably the majority in society and the one that your family follows. You are unlikely to find other choices. We think that this is a denial of people's ability to choose what is incredibly important to them. You come trapped in your religion, you come unable to escape what is so, like, something that might possibly have oppressed you for a long time. They say you should fear a man who has nothing to lose. Well, like, LSE B may not be able to break today because of Aaron's situation. But what we say in response to that is that you probably should have been afraid of LSE B from the start. Thank you. We beg you to oppose.
on the deputy leader of the opposition to
LSE! LSE! LSE!
This motion takes me back to my old Christian days, where on Sundays my church would roam the streets of Brickfields, Kuala Lumpur, giving food packets to the homeless and preaching the word of the Lord. You may have qualms with religion, but there is some hope and some kindness in seeing a homeless man in the streets one day and in the pulpit in the next. We defend not just your right to believe in what you want to believe, but to know what your beliefs can be. A few things we want to rebut first. Number one, this argument where they go, these are radical people who are going to shove a Bible down your throat, literally, figuratively, we don't know, and take like this iron hot poker and brand you with a religious symbol of your true choice. And apparently that's persuasive. That's how you get people to believe in a religion, by forcing it down their throats. Well, coming from a former Christian fundamentalist, let me teach you how to be an effective evangelical. Step number one, be nice. Like, if you are a jerk, you will brand your religion as a religion of jerks. That is a horrible way to get people to believe in your faith, because they'll just walk away from you. They'll take your pamphlet, tear it in half, and shove it back down your throat. So we think when you rub people the wrong way, they're less responsive to your message. This is why we see in the Christians having bake sales instead of having like violent rallies to get people to believe in their religion. An overwhelming majority of this proselytization is peaceful, respectful, and we should respect that as well. No, thank you. But second step, don't be coercive, because if people know that if they're being coerced into your religion, they also know that it's going to be hard to get out. You increase the barriers to entering the religion if you appear coercive or even have a coercive structure to begin with. This is why when we see this religious proselytization, it's usually very, you know what, if you don't like it, you don't have to believe in it, you can have my cookies and walk away. It's usually that sort of proselytization versus that you must believe in it or else we will condemn you, because that doesn't quite work. So the conclusion to this argument, no thank you, is that an overwhelming majority, empirically, of this proselytization is peaceful, is respectful, and is the exact kind of discourse you want to see in public that you're now going to ban. Even if there's a small minority of the Westboro Baptist Church, we don't think that's acceptable to curtail the rights of discussion for all this other peaceful majority of Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, and Muslims. But the third part of this argument is we think that what happens on our side is you get to counter these radicals. So when the Westboro Baptist Church goes out and like be's a jerk, what happens is on our side at least you get to see the peaceful aspects of this religion counter rallying and showing them that the religion is also a religion of kindness. So we get that discourse. Whereas on your side, you only see what the Westboro Baptist Church does within the confines of their church. Usually it's very publicized. It's all over the news how this preacher gave a horrible sermon condemning homosexuals. You see that side of it, but you don't see also the kinder sides and kinder aspects of religion. We get better choice on our side. The second argument is about whether this is coercive in nature. I've proven to you that this is usually very respectful and good discourse. Is this coercive? The first thing is your choice actually a choice if you've never thought of the alternatives? And this is the thing about most individuals. They never know the significance of their choice, or they don't know what they don't know, or they have no incentive to pursue what they don't know. It's the same way we allow like mass consumer advertising, we allow people to spread their ideas. It's because they know you can't rely on individuals to go out and pursue ideas on their own. You have to do the service to them to show them what the ideas can be. So we don't think you just have freedom of choice on your side. What you have is a lack of choice that leads to one singular choice dictating what you can believe in. That's not a choice. No, thank you. But second of all, in many cases, you can just say no to this sort of proselytization. You just not take the pamphlet. You walk away from public. Bear in mind, this is not about people pinning you down and forcing religion down your throat, because that's kind of illegal. This is about those pamphlets that you talk about, which are very easy to say no to and opt out of. But third of all, we don't think you have a right to be protected against differing ideas. Just principally, you have people have a right to be able to hear the vast spectrum of ideas and decide for themselves. Not only that, there's some people who want to hear it, and on your side, they never get the opportunity. But fourth of all, school. You're going to teach this in school. Like, where there's usually, like, in some countries, like, one dominant religion, and you're going to get that country to teach religion in schools, and apparently that's better than the preacher who gives you cookies in, like, the street, compared to, like, this classroom teacher probably hates you. We don't think you can opt out of school. We think that's an even greater infringement of choice. And not only that, you're inflicting it on children rather than consenting adults in the private space. Your proposal is horrible, but I'll take you anyway.
Positive activism can happen within the private sphere of religion. Oftentimes it's the radicals that depend on the loudest form of that in public. Do you think it's just for conservative religious groups to literally stand outside abortion clinics and tell women that they're making immoral choices?
Yep, that's called freedom of protesting. You allow people to protest a lot of things. If a country allows people to protest things, you can also protest abortion. You may not like it, but that's how freedom of speech works. But most of we're going to prove to you that you are disadvantaging those in the most underprivileged conditions, those in poverty. Why are those in poverty receive less exposure to religion? The first thing I want to point out is no, you don't have access to Wikipedia, you don't have access to the internet, and you also have very little resources. Those pamphlets on the streets are only your access to knowing the ideas of a religion and being able to form a religious identity altogether. Religion must come to these individuals. They cannot come to religion because they're not in the position to do so. But second of all, these are usually individuals, and the poor and those in poverty, who lack formal networks and community. We tend to associate the poor in like Latin America with religion and being religious, but there are many who fall out of the system. They don't have the support structures that make poverty at least tolerable when they're under religion, but they also don't have anyone to tell them about religion in private because they don't have access to the communities, be it formal or informal altogether. So the conclusion to this is a principled argument that for many countries, especially outside the West, religion is seen as an integral part of your identity. It means you should have access to it. And on your side, you make access asymmetric. Only the most rich, only the middle class and lower middle class ever get to know what religion is, but you hamper the access to those who are homeless, those who are poor, those who never are able to explore religion otherwise. We think you have a right to know about religion, not just to have freedom of religion, but to have freedom to access religion. Second half of this argument, why is religion actually good? Actually for the least privileged. So yes, you can talk about condoms in the African continent. Yes, all those things happen. But to many people around the world, they see religion as a protector. Number one is because most countries lack formal welfare systems, or at least the welfare system doesn't cover the gaps. Even on the streets of London, you see homeless individuals who are not covered by the welfare system. Religious groups cover those slack. But second of all, what happens is when these welfare systems don't give you community, but religions do. They're more than welfare. These are people that check on you. Support is usually responsive and personalized to where you're hurting the most. They're likely to lead you to those formal systems of welfare because they are your entry points into the formal system. So you think that all social communities are fundamentally coercive, but people opt into it anyway because it's worth it. The same goes for religion when you opt into a religious community. But third of all, we give people a position of strength. What we see is that people get nurtured by the church or by the Buddhist temple for over years, and they're in a position of strength where they can make the choice for themselves in the future. I like to think that to that man we gave a food packet to on the streets 12 years ago, we never saw him after that first Sunday. But I like to think that at the very least, I was not a radical, neither was the Hindu temple or the Buddhist quill, which also helped the homeless in my area. I like to think that at the very least, even though that man did not come back to church, he at least had a good day. And I'm proud to defend that.
education and is likely to provide the education they rely on in a bad way, and also not provide money for the churches or other private expressions of faith. So the advocacy of it is important for anyone to access it. Second, does this actually lead people to engage in measures to defend themselves? One, this requires you to believe that they think that advocacy, which they describe as a few crazy street preachers, is such a fundamental threat to people that it's neutralized by removing it from the public space, but not by the existence of women wearing veils and the existence of mosques in a public space, which is actually what many American people pretty simplistically see as the problem with Islam / those Muslims in the country, which is realistically not what's actually going to be removed. Second, this suggests that those expressions of symbols that they say you should rely on because you don't need it in the public space are actually under enormous existential threat in most places around the world where there is public speech, and that it's likely that those things would remove even the private expressions of faith. So actually, this policy has an even greater effect in those situations. Thirdly, it's impossible to defend yourself. You don't have to convince other people to be religious, but in a situation where your state is under threat and you're being told not to be Islamic, being able to advocate within your community for that belief and saying why it is a good belief, why it stands up to those things, is important for being able to sustain your belief against large existential threats that are otherwise posed to it. Second issue of extension, what religions look like. Firstly, they say this is only extreme conservative people engaging in minimal attacks. First, I would point out that advocacy, and not just evangelization, looks like public discussions like political parties. Second, not all religions are conservative, and to say that is somewhat insane and offensive, but here's what it is. People who are strongly religious, including people like people of the Uniting Church, who are incredibly left-wing, like socialist Catholics in South America, who advocate against other restrictive government policies and their impact on the poor, those things are important for populations. What does this mean religions look like? First, this is a way to bring people back from an extreme version of religion that is radicalized by the existence of states that they talk about. It's a way to advocate for staying in a religion as opposed to a radical version of religion or going to a radical resistance to a state that is often dominated by another religion that you don't see as representing yourself. It's necessary to advocate and not just give a form of information about what Islam is to get people to be able to understand why they can still be religious and coexist in that state in a way that does not resist the state. It also seeks to do things like address public conceptions, because the advocacy of Islam as moderate and a religion of peace is what resists public conceptions of what it means to be an Islamic terrorist, and that's the dominant conception. You need to advocate for it, not just put out a freaking pamphlet about what it means. Second, why did religions look worse when they can't advocate? When you are advocating, what this realistically is, for instance, the way the large body of the Catholic Church that is in many ways moderate has to advocate to new populations, has to seek out its worst practices that are hated by some people within those populations and get rid of them, has to listen to people within them. Secondly, they seek out information about what is dissatisfactory in that advocacy or what people within the church don't do, which is why you get enormous surveys in the Catholic Church about what is important to people and what people are responding to, which makes those churches more likely to be responsive. Even if they're still in secret trying to convince people, it's better if that public advocacy is subject to scrutiny. It looks much better. Lastly, services are better because the majority advocacy says that to be a good Christian, you have to engage in this kind of services, and that advocacy is a public demonstration of your own religion, which is the only way to actually convince people to engage in it on a large scale, which is the reason that you get things the state can't provide because they don't want to advocate to poor populations. Yeah.
So when religious success cannot be as easily measured by proselytization, are we likely to see doctrinal change in religion, focusing more on interiority and hence more non-violence, accessing CG's benefits for more fundamental work?
No. So what I would say is, when you are a shrinking religion, you're likely to focus on those more extreme people in the first place, which is the concerns you're worried about. If you can advocate to more people, you bring them in and want to maintain yourself, you're more likely to listen to them. And thirdly, you can criticize those public expressions of religious advocacy that wouldn't happen otherwise. Why is it unfair to the expression of existence of religion? First, if you're talking about a large state that is dominant in one religion, this means that the effective existence of a religion can't happen because you need advocacy to get public funding for that religion in the first place, which means that any of the private expressions they talk about are incredibly unlikely to happen. Those private expressions combined with the public to actually mean something. Secondly, criticism and internal movement only happens when you have the ability to compete on religious grounds, which requires you to say what is a better Christian position on this position in the US policy, which is not possible if you just have a disclaimer about what is Christianity. It requires competing conceptions of religion to appeal to what will always be religious populations and makes them able to appeal to what is actually a better religious form of expression. Last lastly, on public interaction. This means you can criticize it in a way that is not just dog whistling, because when you just have dog whistling, you still have political extremism that's hard to criticize on the basis of legitimate religious grounds that many people would respond to. Secondly, if we're talking about majority religious states, if this is not allowing religious persons into politics or into the government, that will make those people extremely angry and resistant to the conception of a secularist state. If it is allowing them into that institution, you effectively shut out any discussion of the basis on which those policies are made, criticism of it, or the existence of minority religions' capacity to question that state or to advocate for their own cause. When a majority religious state is doing that via the apparatus of the state with no other questioning, this is a violation of religion, it's a violation of how state should happen. We're proud to oppose.
Panel, 4 questions at the end of this debate. The first, what does advocacy look like? Because let's be clear, the sneaky push at GovWhip to say that this is proselytising in a small number of city squares and absolutely nothing else, not only clashes with your opening, who spoke directly about charities and the conduct of charities in the public sphere and on political parties, but clashes with very simple statements like, if a person from Islam gets up and says, I am a Muslim, this is what Islam looks like, this is why I think it is a good religion that is useful to others, they are in turn advocating it publicly, and that has to fall under what you're talking about. But the more they wanted to limit the sorts of speech they were actually banning, the more they undermine their own extension and make it less and less likely to end the violence they want to talk about. The last thing they said is, it just makes you think it's the most extreme belief. People only saying that you're worried you're going to go to hell. Look, people will still do that by your own analysis now. They'll just say, by the way, the church is around the corner, there's a great sausage sizzle out back, we're going to talk about God there, right? If that's still allowed, that is still coercive, that is still all the things you like. Listen to how you've undermined your own extension. But now, the bulk of the debate. Firstly, is public advocacy of religion oppressive? Secondly, what does no thank you list look like in the short term? Thirdly, what does religions look like in the long run? What do we get from OG? OG say a few things. Firstly, that religion says unknowable things, that it's about different axioms, that it often attacks identity. We say firstly that this is very assertive and untrue for the vast majority of religious claims. Whilst the definition of God existing might be unknowable, theological and doctrinal interpretations such as a Catholic ought believe X or a Protestant ought believe X are quite knowable and quite discernible by both the history of tradition. So straight away, a large part is untrue. We would obviously also support the banning of hateful or violent speech. That's not something we have to stand for. But this is also true for lots of other philosophies. In my POI, I told you about conservatism, but equally, right, the Marxists who say, I'm not allowed to have private property on my campus attack my identity, but I don't think it's worth us banning them. The point here is that this policy, because there are lots of things they still allow, is discriminatory, and they have to provide extra burden as to what's so pernicious about religion. The next response we get is they say, but only the worst part expressed the most often. That's a good argument for state sponsorship of more progressive religions, not the topic, but equally not something, no thank you, that you solve. But again, it's assertive and untrue, given that we're talking about large amounts of Catholic and Islamic charity, or the Uniting Methodist Church in Australia and America, which are deeply progressive, which have supported things like gay marriage. But equally, no doubt the most common form of religious advocacy occurs by religious figureheads talking in public and advocating for their religion and trying to sell that, something that is obviously not. The last point, and this is iterated again at CG, very strange, it's not an effective form of recruitment. When was efficacy ever a requirement for my ability to speak in public? As though I needed to be a debater to be able to speak in the town square. Utterly ridiculous. And this is a hilarious point when you get to the C extension. They say, proselytizing is a form of attack in many states, including majority religious states. If that's true, then it's in direct intention with all your materials saying how ineffective and a waste of time it is, right? If I'm the Catholic majority in Ireland, I want the Protestants to be bloody wasting their time going around. There's no harm in them doing that. You need to engage with your own characterization. But again, that CG extension only applies in a minority of cases, given that most states on the planet are multi-religious, and most states, in fact, have fairly large degrees of pluralism. That was an entire enormous part of this world that side didn't want to engage with. At the end of this point, you can see that the principal justifications for banning the speech, given they would still allow religious schools, still allow all other forms of ideological ideas, does not stand. Secondly, no thank you. What does this do in the short term? They say it ends violence, because now people, those worried about proselytizing will not believe this. Just imagine the backlash from the Jewish community when you now cannot sell to the diasporic Jews around the world why they should pick up their Jewish heritage and embrace the Jewish religion. That is obviously going to vastly overwhelm the small instances of street violence in Belfast that were the absolute signature harm of your case. But it's just absurd, right? Because by their own analysis, they want to keep religious symbols. The GovWhip wanted religious speech that was not advocacy. Why did those not also cause violence? You underanalyze criminalized it, that's your detriment. We say, obviously they don't, because you tell us you ignore it. That's something that we're allowed to do. But here's the thing that Emma tells you. It massively empowers the oppressive majority. It's likely to fuel backlashes. It's likely to tell Trump, now that you've banned religious advocacy, of course you can ban the burqa, because religion doesn't have a place in the public sphere. They say, it says it's not extreme. No, because you ignore all the cultural inertia and the backlash against religion. You prevent religions from being advocates for their own beliefs. I'll take closing if they've got one. Yeah.
The reason why we allow it in private is because far too people will hear it. When you bring in the entire public, what that means is you reinforce religious divides, which means that conflicts go on longer.
No.
Change doesn't
No,
happen.
look, you can't at one point say no one is hearing this message and everyone is ignoring it, and then say everyone is hearing this message and is being incensed by it. Pick one, but it's too late, so that's your fault and that's your case. What happens to religion in the long run? This is my favourite point in the debate. OG get up here and they're like, there will be doctrinal evolution, it will become more progressive, and they use the word interiority 6 times. This is a very strange argument, made even stranger by them picking the example of the Iranian Revolution as an example of progressive change. Yes, because when Ayman Zawahiri was locked up in Egyptian prison and developed the theological basis for Al-Qaeda, he thought, how can I be more inclusive rather than how can I not fight back against the state that is oppressed, right? You massively increase public, like that point, my favourite, the most absurd. But if they're worried about radicalisation, advocacy was an excellent, no thank you, it's too late anyway, bulwark to radicalisation. Why was that? All the points Emma gives you, that advocacy allows diverse religious perspectives, but importantly, doctrinal debates to play out in public that challenge public perception and that undermine the extremist undercurrents. So it's very important when 500 imams wrote a letter to Baghdadi, the head of ISIS, saying, your interpretation of Islam is not theologically correct. That was an incredibly effective form of advocacy against the backlash. Consider, we told you that it leads religion to do things like drop the worst elements, survey their members, as the Catholic Church does repeatedly through things like the Synod on the Family, to allow and gain an understanding of what they believe in, to more effectively advocate. That's a form of moderation that, if you believe is important, we get more under our side. But again, we fight co-option. Because no, Wahhabist madrasas in Bangladesh and Malaysia will still be funded, and you still allow students to be sent there. On politics, finally, we end the ability to critique or analyse religious politicians, massively unresponded to by that side. It's clear at the end of the debate what an absurd policy this is. For all those reasons, we oppose.